The snow started falling at 2 in the morning, and by 5, I was already halfway through clearing the hospital emergency entrance when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I'm Quincy Valerio, owner of Valerio Snow Removal Services, and I've been doing this work for 12 years in Rochester, Minnesota. I've seen every kind of winter storm this state can throw at you, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen that morning. My Caterpillar front-end loader was working perfectly, pushing mountains of heavy, wet snow away from the main ambulance bay at Mayo Clinic Hospital when I made the mistake of answering that call. "Is this Quincy Valerio?" A shrill voice demanded on the other end. "Yeah, speaking. Who's this?" "This is Patricia Henderson, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. Your commercial vehicle has been parked on Willow Creek Drive for the past 3 days, and it's in violation of our community covenants." I stopped the loader and sat there in the cab, watching the snow come down in thick sheets. "Madam, I live in that neighborhood. That's my work vehicle, and I park it there because that's my house. Commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited from overnight parking in Riverside Meadows. It's clearly stated in Section 8, Paragraph 4 of our CC and Articles. You need to move it immediately." I looked at my watch. It was 5:15 in the morning, during what was quickly becoming one of the worst snowstorms Rochester had seen in 5 years. "Madam, with all due respect, I'm currently working an emergency snow removal contract at the hospital. People's lives depend on keeping this entrance clear." "That's not my concern, Mr. Valerio. The rules are the rules. If that vehicle isn't moved within 2 hours, we'll have it towed." "2 hours? Lady, I'm in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm using this loader right now. It's at the hospital, not even in the neighborhood." "Then I suggest you move your other commercial vehicle, the white pickup truck with your company logo plastered all over it." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My work truck was parked in my driveway where it had been since I got home yesterday evening. That's my personal vehicle. I need it to get to work sites. It has commercial markings. That makes it a commercial vehicle. 2 hours, Mr. Valerio, or we're calling the tow company." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a moment, watching an ambulance pull up to the bay I just cleared. The paramedics jumped out, rushing to open the back doors and pull out a stretcher. This was exactly why my job mattered. This was why I'd taken the contract with the hospital in the first place. I called my wife, Maria, who answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Hey, babe, sorry to wake you, but I need you to move my truck out of the driveway." "What? Why?" "Quincy, it's 5 in the morning." I explained the situation as quickly as I could while simultaneously getting back to work, using one hand to operate the loader controls. She was frustrated, understandably so, but agreed to move the truck to the street for now. I thanked her and hung up, focusing on the task at hand. The snow was accumulating faster than I'd anticipated, and I needed to make another pass in front of the ambulance bay. 2 hours later, at 7:15, Maria called me back. She was crying. "They towed it, Quincy. They towed the loader." I stopped what I was doing, my heart dropping into my stomach. "What do you mean they towed the loader?" "The loader is here with me at the hospital." "No, not that one. The other loader, the smaller one you keep at home for residential jobs." And that's when I realized the full scope of the problem. I had 2 loaders. The big Caterpillar I was currently operating at the hospital, and a smaller Kubota loader that I kept parked on the side of our property for smaller residential contracts. I'd completely forgotten about it when Patricia called because I'd been so focused on the hospital work. "They can't tow a loader, Maria. Those things weigh thousands of pounds. They brought a massive flatbed truck." There were 3 guys and Patricia was standing there in her bathrobe with an umbrella, watching the whole thing. She looked so satisfied with herself, Quincy. She was actually smiling. I felt my jaw clench. Where did they take it? Some impound lot on the south side. Precision towing, I think the truck said. I finished up my immediate work at the hospital and called my supervisor, David Chen, explaining the situation. He was understanding but concerned. We had 3 other hospital locations that needed clearing, and I'd been counting on using that smaller loader for one of them. Do what you need to do, David said. But we really need all the equipment running today. This storm isn't letting up. I drove the big loader to the hospital's equipment yard where I kept it between shifts, then took my personal car, which Maria had moved to a shopping center parking lot a few blocks away. The drive to Precision Towing took 20 minutes through increasingly dangerous road conditions. The whole city was turning into a snow globe. The impound lot was a muddy, slushy mess surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. I walked into the small office building, which smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set man in his 50s with a graying beard. "Help you?" he asked without looking up from his computer. "Yeah, you guys towed my loader this morning from Riverside Meadows. I need to get it back." He finally looked at me, then glanced at a clipboard on the wall. "Valerio, that's me. Okay, well, the towing fee is $800 plus there's a $150 storage fee for each day it's here." $800. You guys towed it like 3 hours ago, he shrugged. It's a commercial vehicle. Required a specialized flatbed and extra equipment. That's the fee. Fine, I'll pay it. I need it back now. I've got contracts to fulfill. Can't release it today. The HOA requested a hold until they can review the violation with their board. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? The HOA has a hold on the vehicle. They're having a special board meeting tonight to determine the fine structure. Until they release the hold, I can't release the vehicle. That's insane. That's my equipment. I need it for work. There's a snowstorm happening right now. Take it up with your HOA, buddy. I just tow them and store them. I left the impound lot feeling like I was going to explode. Instead of driving home, I went straight to Patricia Henderson's house. I'd looked up her address in the neighborhood directory months ago, when she'd first started sending me nasty letters about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. Patricia lived in one of the larger homes in Riverside Meadows, a 2-story colonial with a 3-car garage and a lawn that probably required a full-time gardener to maintain. I parked on the street and marched up to her front door, ringing the doorbell repeatedly. She answered wearing a velour tracksuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that looked like it was giving her a facelift. She was probably in her early 50s, with the kind of face that suggested she asked to speak to managers on a regular basis. "Mr. Valerio, I was expecting you. You put a hold on my equipment during a snowstorm. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've enforced the community covenants that you agreed to follow when you purchased your home here. Perhaps this will serve as an incentive for you to take our rules more seriously. People's lives are at stake. I have a contract to keep hospital entrances clear. Ambulances need access." She crossed her arms. "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before violating our parking restrictions. Commercial vehicles have no place in a residential neighborhood. They're unsightly, they decrease property values, and they attract the wrong element." "The wrong element? Lady, I run a snow removal business. I'm not cooking meth in my garage. Your tone is completely inappropriate, Mr. Valerio. If you continue to harass me on my own property, I'll call the police." "Call them, please. I'd love to explain to the cops how you've impounded equipment that's actively needed for emergency services. She actually smiled at that. The police will tell you the same thing I'm telling you. This is a civil matter between you and the HOA. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for. She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, snow falling on my head, trying to decide if breaking down her door would be worth the assault charges. I decided it wouldn't be and walked back to my car. I called my lawyer, Tom Richardson, who I'd used when setting up my business. He listened to my explanation and let out a low whistle. "Quincy, this is a mess. Technically, the HOA does have the right to enforce parking restrictions. But holding your equipment hostage during an emergency is something else entirely. I'd need to review your HOA covenants in detail." "Tom, I don't have time for that. I've got 3 other properties that need clearing, including another hospital location. Can they legally do this?" "It's complicated. Minnesota law does allow HOAs broad enforcement powers, but there are limits. The problem is that challenging them takes time. You'd need to file for an emergency injunction, and even that might take days." "Days? Tom, this is happening right now." "I understand. Look, go to the board meeting tonight. Bring documentation of your hospital contract. Show them the consequences of their actions. Maybe they'll see reason." I doubted Patricia Henderson had ever seen reason in her life, but I agreed to try. I spent the rest of the day working with my remaining equipment, falling further and further behind on my contracts. The hospital was my priority, so I kept the big loader there, but I had to call 2 smaller clients and tell them I couldn't make it today. One of them, a nursing home, told me they understood, but that they'd need to find another contractor if I couldn't guarantee service. 12 years of building my business, and Patricia Henderson was destroying it in a single day. The board meeting was held at 7 that evening in the Riverside Meadows Clubhouse, a pretentious building with crown molding and chandelier lighting that probably cost more than my first truck. When I arrived, there were already about 15 people in the room, most of them looking annoyed to be there. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all of them looking equally self-important. I recognized 2 of them from neighborhood functions. Gerald Hutchins, a retired accountant who lived 3 doors down from me, and Linda Morrison, who ran some kind of online boutique from her home. Patricia banged a gavel on the table like she was a judge presiding over a murder trial. "This emergency board meeting is now in session. We're here to discuss the continued violations of parking restrictions by Mr. Quincy Valerio of 847 Willow Creek Drive. Mr. Valerio, you have 5 minutes to address the board." I stood up, holding the folder Tom had told me to prepare. "Thanks. I'll make this simple. I run a snow removal business. I've lived in this neighborhood for 7 years without any issues until you became HOA president 6 months ago, Patricia." "That's President Henderson to you," she interrupted. "Fine. President Henderson. My equipment is essential infrastructure right now. I have a contract with Mayo Clinic Hospital to keep their emergency entrances clear during snow events. That's not optional work. That's life or death. This morning, you had one of my loaders impounded. Because of that, I've had to cancel contracts with other clients, including a nursing home. Elderly people are stuck inside because their parking lot hasn't been cleared." Gerald Hutchins leaned forward. "Mr. Valerio, no one is disputing the importance of your work. However, you did agree to the HOA covenants when you bought your home. Those covenants clearly state that commercial vehicles cannot be parked overnight on residential streets or in driveways. I understand that, but there has to be some common sense applied here. This is an emergency situation." Linda Morrison spoke up. "Where do you propose parking your equipment then? I have a large backyard. I could park the smaller loader back there when I'm not using it. You wouldn't even see it from the street." Patricia shook her head before I even finished the sentence. "Absolutely not." Section 12. Paragraph 2 clearly states that no commercial equipment can be stored on residential property, visible or not. It's prohibited entirely. So what am I supposed to do? I need to keep this equipment somewhere. "Rent a commercial storage facility like every other business owner," Patricia said. "Your refusal to comply with basic neighborhood standards is not our problem. The nearest commercial storage facility is 15 miles away. During a snowstorm, that's an extra hour of travel time each way. Time that people at the hospital don't have." Patricia leaned back in her chair with a satisfied expression. "Again, not our problem. The board needs to vote on the fine structure for Mr. Valerio's violations. I propose $500 per day for each day a commercial vehicle is present in the neighborhood, retroactive to when I first documented the violation 3 days ago." 3 days ago, I said, my voice rising. "You never said anything to me 3 days ago." "I documented it with photographs and submitted it to the board. You should have received a notice in your mailbox. I never got any notice." "That sounds like a personal problem. All in favor of the $500 per day fine." 4 hands went up. Only Gerald looked slightly uncomfortable, but he still raised his hand. "The motion passes. Mr. Valerio, you now owe the Riverside Meadows HOA $1,500 in fines, plus $500 for each additional day a commercial vehicle is present. Furthermore, your loader will remain impounded until these fines are paid in full." I felt my hands shaking. This is extortion. This is enforcement of community standards. If you don't like it, you're free to sell your home and move somewhere more appropriate for your line of work. "I'm not selling my house because you're on a power trip." Patricia's face turned red. "I will not tolerate personal attacks during official board meetings. You're out of order, Mr. Valerio. This meeting is adjourned." I left the clubhouse feeling defeated and furious in equal measure. When I got home, Maria was waiting up for me and I filled her in on everything that had happened. "This is insane, Quincy. Can she really do this?" According to Tom, technically yes. "We could fight it in court, but that takes time and money we don't have." "What about the hospital contract?" "I called David earlier. They're understanding, but if I can't fulfill the contract, they'll have to find another company. That's $40,000 in revenue just this winter." Maria sat down at the kitchen table, her face pale. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I'm not letting Patricia Henderson destroy everything I've built." That night, I barely slept. My mind kept racing through possible solutions, each one seeming worse than the last. By morning, the snow had stopped, but the damage was done. Rochester was buried under 18 inches of heavy snow, and the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees. Perfect conditions for a backlog of snow removal work. I got up at 4 and headed back to the hospital with the big loader. At least I still had that. I spent 6 hours clearing the emergency entrance, the main parking lot, and the helicopter pad. Around 10 in the morning, David Chen came out to check on me. "Hey Quincy, you got a minute?" I stopped the loader and climbed down. David looked uncomfortable, which immediately made my stomach drop. "What's up?" "Listen, you're doing great work here, no complaints about that. But I got a call this morning from the hospital administrator. Apparently, someone filed a complaint about our snow removal contractor." "Let me guess. Patricia Henderson, how did you know?" "Because she's trying to destroy my business." "What did she say?" "She claimed that you're operating without proper licensing, that your equipment isn't properly maintained, and that you're creating a liability risk for the hospital." I pulled out my phone and opened my business documents app. "David, here's my contractor's license. It's current through next December. Here are my insurance certificates all up to date. Here are the maintenance records for all my equipment. I can prove every single one of her claims is false." David looked relieved. "Email all of that to me right now. I'll forward it to the administrator. I believe you, Quincy, but we have to document this stuff." "She's not going to stop. You know that, right? She's going to keep calling, keep complaining, keep trying to make my life hell until I give up." "Why? What did you do to her?" "Existed in her neighborhood while running a business. That's literally it." David shook his head. "People are crazy. Look, just send me that documentation and keep doing what you're doing. We're not dropping you based on some random complaint." I sent him everything he needed and got back to work. But Patricia's interference didn't stop there. Over the next 3 days, she filed complaints with the city about my business license, with the state about my commercial vehicle registrations, and even with the Better Business Bureau claiming I'd defrauded customers. Every single complaint was baseless, but each one required hours of my time to respond to and document. Meanwhile, my Kubota loader sat in the impound lot, racking up daily storage fees. I called Tom Richardson again. "Tom, this has gone beyond HOA enforcement. She's actively trying to destroy my business with false complaints. That has to be illegal." "It probably is. That could fall under harassment or even tortious interference with business relationships, but proving it requires documentation and time." "I don't have time. I'm losing clients every day. That nursing home I told you about, they hired someone else. I also lost 2 residential contracts because I couldn't service them during the storm." "Quincy, I hear you, but the legal system doesn't move at the speed of your business needs. If you want to fight this properly, we need to file a lawsuit against both Patricia Henderson personally and the HOA. We'd need to request an emergency injunction to get your equipment back, and we'd need to file for damages based on lost business income." "How much is that going to cost me?" "My retainer for something like this would be $5,000. The case could cost anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 depending on how long it drags out." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't have $30,000 to spend on a lawsuit. The money I'd been saving was earmarked for a new truck next year. That evening, I was working on paperwork at home when Maria came into my office looking worried. "Quincy, there's a car outside with someone taking pictures of our house." I looked out the window and saw a silver sedan parked across the street. A woman with a camera was photographing my property from different angles. I went outside and walked over to the car. "Can I help you?" The woman rolled down her window. She was in her 30s, professional looking, with a blazer and clipboard. "Are you Quincy Valerio?" "Yeah. Why are you taking pictures of my house?" "I'm Jennifer Katz, a code enforcement officer with the city of Rochester. We received a complaint about your property." "Let me guess." Patricia Henderson filed it. She checked her clipboard. "I can't disclose who filed the complaint, but I need to inspect your property for any zoning violations." "There aren't any. I don't run my business from my house. I just park my work vehicle here." "May I take a look at your backyard?" I didn't really have a choice, so I led her around to the back. My yard was a decent size, maybe 1/3 of an acre, with a shed where I kept tools and some outdoor furniture covered for winter. Jennifer walked around, taking notes and photographs. "Is that your shed?" she asked, pointing. "Yeah. I built it 5 years ago with all the proper permits." "How large is it?" 12 by 16. I checked the zoning codes before I built it. It's under the maximum size allowed without special approval." She measured it anyway, then took more photos. "Okay, Mr. Valerio. I'll file my report with the city. If there are any violations, you'll receive a notice in the mail." After she left, I called Tom Richardson again, even though it was after 6 in the evening. He answered on the 3rd ring. Patricia is now filing false complaints with the city to harass me. This has to stop. Did the code enforcement officer find any violations? No, because there aren't any, but that's not the point. She's wasting government resources and my time with frivolous complaints. Quincy, I understand your frustration, but here's the reality. Unless you're willing to invest in a serious legal battle, Patricia Henderson can keep doing this. She knows most people won't spend tens of thousands of dollars fighting an HOA. That's how people like her maintain power. So I'm just supposed to let her destroy my business? No. You need to decide if you're willing to fight back hard. If you are, I can help you, but it's going to get expensive and ugly. I thought about it for a long moment. Let me talk to Maria. I'll call you back tomorrow. That night, Maria and I sat up late discussing our options. We could pay Patricia's extortion fees and move my equipment to a storage facility, effectively letting her win. We could sell the house and move, starting over in a different neighborhood, or we could fight back with everything we had. I'm not letting her force us out of our home, Maria said. We've lived here for 7 years. This is where we plan to raise our kids. She doesn't get to take that from us. Fighting her could cost us everything we've saved. And letting her win will cost you your business anyway. At least if we fight, we have a chance. The next morning, I called Tom and told him to file the lawsuit. He got to work immediately, requesting an emergency hearing to get my loader released from impound and filing for damages based on lost business income. We also filed a harassment complaint against Patricia personally. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, I continued working with my limited equipment, falling further behind. I had to turn down 2 new contracts because I simply didn't have the capacity to handle them. The night before the hearing, I got a call from David Chen at the hospital. "Quincy, we need to talk." My heart sank. "What happened?" The hospital administrator got another complaint. "This one claims you've been drinking on the job and operating equipment while intoxicated." "That's completely false. David, you've worked with me for 3 years. Have you ever seen me drink at work?" "No," and I told him that. "But he's required to investigate any safety complaints. He wants you to take a drug and alcohol test tomorrow morning before the hearing." "Fine. I'll do it right now if he wants. I have nothing to hide." "I know. I'm sorry about this. Someone's really got it out for you." I went to the hospital that night and took the drug test, which obviously came back clean, but the damage was done. Even false accusations left a stain, made people question things they never would have questioned before. The emergency hearing was held at the Olmsted County Courthouse. Tom had prepared a thick folder of documentation. My business licenses, my contracts, my maintenance records, and a detailed accounting of the financial damage Patricia's actions had caused. We also had photos showing the timestamps of her complaints and demonstrating the pattern of harassment. The judge was a middle-aged man named Robert Crawford, who looked like he'd heard every ridiculous dispute imaginable. Patricia showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Bradley Cooper who probably charged $400 an hour. Tom presented our case first, laying out the timeline of events and the financial impact. "Your Honor, Mr. Valerio operates a legitimate, licensed business providing essential services during weather emergencies. The defendant, Miss Henderson, has weaponized her position as HOA president to systematically destroy his livelihood through frivolous complaints, false accusations, and unreasonable enforcement of HOA covenants." Bradley Cooper stood up. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of covenant enforcement." Mr. Valerio agreed to abide by the HOA rules when he purchased his property. He's been in repeated violation of clearly stated parking restrictions. The HOA has every right to enforce its covenants through fines and, if necessary, impoundment of vehicles. Judge Crawford looked at the documents in front of him. Mr. Cooper, I'm looking at these HOA covenants. Section 8, Paragraph 4 does prohibit commercial vehicles. However, I'm also looking at a pattern of complaints filed by Ms. Henderson that seem to go well beyond covenant enforcement. False claims of intoxication, fraudulent business practices, and code violations. Can you explain that? Bradley Cooper looked uncomfortable for the first time. Your Honor, Ms. Henderson has a duty to ensure community standards are maintained. If she had concerns about Mr. Valerio's conduct, she was right to report them to the appropriate authorities. Even when those concerns are demonstrably false, Judge Crawford asked. Mr. Valerio passed a drug test. The city found no code violations. The state confirmed all his licenses and registrations are current. At what point does this stop being covenant enforcement and become harassment? Patricia stood up, which made her lawyer wince. Your Honor, if I may speak. Miss Henderson, that's what you're paying your attorney for. I understand, but I want the court to understand that Mr. Valerio has been a problem resident since I took office. He consistently pushes back against reasonable rules designed to maintain property values. His commercial vehicles are unsightly and inappropriate for a residential neighborhood. Miss Henderson, does the covenant make any exceptions for emergencies or essential services? She blinked. I'm sorry, your covenants. Do they have any provision for temporary exceptions during weather emergencies or for equipment needed to provide critical services? Well, no, but that's not relevant. The rules are clear. Judge Crawford leaned back in his chair. I disagree. Here's what I'm going to order. First, the impound hold on Mr. Valerio's equipment is immediately released. He'll be responsible for reasonable towing and storage fees, but the HOA cannot prevent him from reclaiming his property. Second, the HOA fines are suspended pending a full trial on the merits of this case. Third, Miss Henderson, you are personally ordered to cease filing complaints against Mr. Valerio unless you have concrete, documented evidence of actual violations. If I see another pattern of false or frivolous complaints, I'll hold you in contempt. Is that clear? Patricia's face turned red. Your Honor, this is outrageous. You're essentially telling me I can't do my job as HOA president. No, Miss Henderson. I'm telling you that your job is to enforce reasonable community standards, not to harass residents you don't like. There's a difference, and you'd be wise to learn it. I wanted to cheer, but Tom put a hand on my arm to keep me quiet. We left the courthouse with an order to release my loader, which I picked up that afternoon. The tow yard charged me $800, which hurt, but at least I had my equipment back. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 days later, I was working at the hospital again when Maria called me, crying hysterically. Quincy, come home right now, please. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Just come home. I dropped everything and drove home, my mind racing through terrible possibilities. When I pulled up to my house, I saw what had upset Maria. Someone had spray painted the word scofflaw across my garage door in bright red paint. My work truck had all 4 tires slashed, and written on my front door in the same red paint was "Move Out." Maria was sitting on the front steps with our neighbor, Ellen Wright, who had her arm around Maria's shoulders. I called the police immediately. 2 officers showed up within 20 minutes. Officer Mike Stevens and Officer Rachel Torres took statements and photographed the damage. They were professional and thorough, but I could tell from their expressions that this kind of vandalism was hard to solve without witnesses or cameras. Mr. Valerio, do you have any idea who might have done this? Officer Stevens asked. I have a very good idea. I'm in a dispute with my HOA president, Patricia Henderson. She's been harassing me for weeks. I explained the whole situation, including the court hearing 2 days ago. Officer Torres took notes. Has Miss Henderson made any direct threats against you or your property? Not explicit threats, no. But she's made it very clear she wants me out of the neighborhood. That's not quite enough for us to question her about this incident, Officer Stevens said, unless you have evidence connecting her to the vandalism. I don't. I was at work all day. We'll file a report and increase patrols in your area. I'd recommend installing security cameras if you haven't already. After the police left, I called Tom Richardson and told him what happened. Quincy, this is escalating. Even if Patricia didn't do this herself, she's created an environment where someone felt empowered to target you. What can we do? Document everything. File a police report, which you've done. Take photos, which you've also done, and get those security cameras installed today. If this happens again and we have footage, we can take criminal action. I spent that evening installing a comprehensive security camera system around my property. 8 cameras covering every angle of the house, garage, and driveway. They were connected to cloud storage, so even if someone damaged them, the footage would be saved. The next week was relatively quiet. I got back to work, catching up on delayed contracts. The hospital was satisfied with my drug test results and the judge's order, so that relationship was secure. I even picked up 2 new residential contracts. Then I got a letter from the Riverside Meadows HOA. It was a notice of a special assessment, charging every homeowner in the neighborhood $500 for enhanced community security measures. According to the letter, the assessment was necessary due to increased security concerns and external threats to neighborhood stability. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. Patricia was now trying to make me pay for security against myself. It was insane. I called an emergency meeting with several neighbors I'd gotten to know over the years. 8 of them came to my house that evening, including Gerald Hutchins from the HOA board. Look, I know most of you aren't thrilled with me right now, I started. Patricia's been spreading stories about me being a problem neighbor, but I want you to hear my side. I walked them through everything that had happened, showing them the documentation, the court order, and the photos of the vandalism. By the time I finished, most of them looked shocked. Ellen Wright spoke up first. Quincy, I had no idea. Patricia told everyone you were running an illegal business and that you'd been verbally abusive to her. I've never been abusive to anyone. She's been targeting me because she doesn't like that I run a snow removal business. Gerald Hutchins looked uncomfortable. I voted for those fines. Patricia told us you were refusing to follow basic rules. She made it sound like you were parking massive equipment in your front yard and running a commercial garage. Gerald, you've been to my house. Have you ever seen massive equipment parked in my front yard? No, he admitted. I see your work truck, which honestly isn't any different from the plumbing contractor's truck 3 streets over or the electrician's van on Maple Drive. Exactly. But for some reason, Patricia has decided I'm the problem that needs to be eliminated. Another neighbor, Marcus Thompson, raised his hand. The special assessment. That's the same amount as the fines Patricia was trying to charge you, isn't it? I nodded. $500. Seems like a pretty big coincidence. That's messed up, Marcus said. She's basically forcing all of us to pay to harass you. Ellen pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency homeowner meeting. We have the right to do that under the HOA bylaws. If enough homeowners sign a petition, we can force a vote of no confidence in the board. Over the next 3 days, Ellen and several other neighbors collected signatures from homeowners throughout Riverside Meadows. They needed signatures from 30% of homes to trigger an emergency meeting. They got 42%. Patricia tried to refuse to schedule the meeting, claiming the petition was improperly formatted. But Tom Richardson sent her a letter explaining that refusing to honor a valid petition would be a violation of Minnesota HOA law and could result in the board being dissolved entirely. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled, with people standing along the walls. I'd never seen so many neighbors in one place. Patricia called the meeting to order, clearly unhappy about the whole situation. This emergency meeting has been called to address concerns about the board's recent decisions regarding community enforcement and special assessments. I want to remind everyone that the board has a fiduciary duty to maintain property values and community standards. Ellen Wright stood up. Patricia, we're here because you've been abusing your authority to harass a neighbor over a personal vendetta. That's not maintaining property values. That's being a bully. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed red. That's a baseless accusation. Mr. Valerio has been in repeated violation of our covenants. Marcus Thompson stood up. Then why haven't you enforced the same rules against Tom Wheeler, who parks his plumbing van in his driveway every night? Or Sandra Mills, who runs an accounting business from her home office? Or the Johnsons, who operate a dog breeding operation in their basement? Patricia stammered. Those are different situations. How? Marcus demanded. Tom's van has his company logo on it, just like Quincy's truck. Sandra meets with clients at her house. The Johnsons are literally running a commercial breeding operation, but you only went after Quincy. Why? The room fell silent, waiting for Patricia's answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gerald Hutchins stood up. I've been on this board for 3 years, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't question Patricia's motivations until recently. I voted for enforcement actions that I now realize were targeted harassment. As a board member, I'm calling for Patricia Henderson's immediate resignation as HOA president. The crowd erupted in applause. Patricia stood up, grabbing her gavel and banging it on the table. You can't force me to resign. I was elected to a 2-year term. We can vote you out, Ellen said. That's what we're here to do. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Henderson as HOA president and a vote to remove her from the board entirely. Tom Richardson had briefed me on the process earlier. A vote of no confidence required a simple majority of homeowners present at the meeting. There were over 100 people in the room, representing at least 70 homes out of the total 140 in Riverside Meadows. The vote wasn't even close. 83 homeowners voted to remove Patricia from the board. Only 12 voted to keep her, presumably her close friends in the neighborhood. Patricia's face went from red to white. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. Before she left, she turned and pointed at me. This isn't over, Valerio. You've turned this entire neighborhood against me. You're going to regret this. She slammed the door behind her. The room fell silent for a moment, then people started talking all at once. Gerald Hutchins tried to restore order. Okay, everyone, we need to elect a new president. Nominations are open. Ellen Wright was nominated and elected almost immediately. Her first act as president was to rescind the special assessment and formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA. Her second act was to propose amending the covenants to allow work vehicles with commercial markings to park in driveways, as long as they weren't actively used for business operations on the property. The amendment passed with overwhelming support. I thought that was finally the end of it. Patricia had been removed from power, the harassment would stop, and I could get back to running my business in peace. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was working a residential contract on the north side of Rochester when I got a call from the hospital. It was David Chen, and he sounded stressed. "Quincy, we have a problem. Someone sabotaged your loader." "What? Which one?" "The big Caterpillar. The one you keep in our equipment yard. Someone got in last night and poured sugar in the fuel tank. The engine's completely seized. It's going to need a total rebuild if it's even salvageable." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That loader was worth $70,000. Even with insurance, I'd be out of commission for weeks while it was repaired or replaced. "Did you call the police?" "They're here now." Security footage shows someone in a dark hoodie climbing the fence around midnight. They knew exactly where the loader was parked and what they were doing. I drove straight to the hospital. The police were photographing my loader and collecting evidence. The detective handling the case was a woman named Sarah Martinez, and she looked at me with sympathy when I explained my situation with Patricia. "Mr. Valerio, destroying commercial equipment like this is a serious crime. We're talking felony criminal damage to property. If we can identify who did this, they're looking at years in prison and massive restitution payments." "Can you get anything from the security footage?" The person was careful. "Hood up, face covered, gloves on, but they made one mistake. They parked across the street, and we got a partial plate number from the hospital's street cameras. How long will it take to track that down?" "I'll run it this afternoon. If it comes back to someone connected to your HOA situation, we'll bring them in for questioning." I spent the rest of the day dealing with insurance companies and trying to figure out how to keep my contracts going with one loader out of commission. The hospital was understanding but concerned. If I couldn't provide reliable service, they'd need to make other arrangements. That evening, Detective Martinez called me. "Mr. Valerio, the partial plate came back to a vehicle registered to Patricia Henderson." My heart started racing. So it was her. Not quite. The vehicle is registered to her, but we need to prove she was driving it. I'm going to bring her in for questioning tomorrow. In the meantime, I need you to think carefully. Has Patricia made any specific threats about your equipment or your business? I thought back through all our interactions. She said I was going to regret turning the neighborhood against her. That was the last thing she said at the HOA meeting. That's not quite specific enough for a direct threat charge, but it establishes motive. "Okay, sit tight. I'll call you after we talk to her." The next day felt like it lasted forever. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the investigation. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, Detective Martinez called. We brought Patricia Henderson in for questioning. She denied everything, claimed her car was parked in her garage all night. But here's the interesting part. We asked if anyone else had access to her vehicle, and she got very defensive, started demanding a lawyer. Isn't that her right? Absolutely. But innocent people usually try to help the investigation before they lawyer up. Her immediate defensive response suggests she knows more than she's saying. So, what happens now? We're getting a warrant to search her property, including her vehicle and any clothing that might have paint or fuel residue. If we find evidence, we'll charge her. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Valerio. Even with the partial plate, proving she personally committed this crime is going to be challenging. I thanked her and hung up, feeling frustrated. Patricia had escalated from harassment to property destruction, but she might still get away with it. 2 days later, Detective Martinez called me again. This time, she sounded excited. "Mr. Valerio, we got her. The search warrant turned up clothing with fuel stains that match the type used in your loader. We also found a pair of bolt cutters in her garage with paint chips that match the fence at the hospital equipment yard. She's being charged with felony criminal damage to property, trespassing, and criminal mischief." That's great. What happens now? She'll be arraigned tomorrow. Given the severity of the charges and the value of the damaged property, the prosecutor is asking for a $50,000 bond. She'll probably make bail, but she'll have strict conditions. No contact with you, no going near your property or the hospital. And the criminal case. That could take months. But with the evidence we have, her attorney will probably recommend a plea deal. She's looking at prison time if this goes to trial and she loses. Patricia did make bail, posting bond the next day, but the damage to her reputation was immediate and catastrophic. The local news picked up the story, running headlines about an HOA president arrested for sabotaging a hospital contractor's equipment. Her employer, a financial services company in downtown Rochester, placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal case. Meanwhile, my insurance company agreed to cover the repairs to my loader. They also started a civil suit against Patricia to recover their payout, which meant she'd be facing financial ruin even if she somehow avoided prison. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Patricia's attorney tried various motions to suppress evidence, all of which were denied. 6 weeks after her arrest, the prosecutor offered a plea deal. 2 years in prison, suspended to 18 months with work release, plus 5 years of probation and full restitution for the damage to my equipment. Patricia's attorney recommended she take the deal. The alternative was going to trial, where she faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted. 3 months after her arrest, Patricia Henderson stood in front of Judge Crawford, the same judge who'd heard my original emergency hearing against the HOA. He looked at her with disappointment. "Miss Henderson, I gave you very clear instructions months ago. I told you to stop harassing Mr. Valerio and to focus on legitimate covenant enforcement. Instead, you escalated to criminal activity. You damaged essential equipment during winter, potentially putting lives at risk by interfering with hospital access. Do you understand the severity of what you've done?" Patricia, looking much older and more worn down than she had at that first HOA meeting, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm accepting the plea agreement with one modification. In addition to jail time and restitution, you are permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Minnesota. If you want to live in an HOA community, fine, but you will never hold power over your neighbors again. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor." Patricia was led away by a bailiff to begin serving her sentence. Tom Richardson, sitting next to me in the courtroom, leaned over and whispered, "It's finally over." He was right. The criminal case was resolved, the insurance had covered my equipment repairs, and my business was back on track. The hospital renewed my contract for another 3 years. I even picked up 2 new commercial accounts, including the Olmsted County government buildings. Ellen Wright proved to be an excellent HOA president. She focused on actual community issues like organizing neighborhood events and maintaining common areas, rather than harassing residents over minor violations. The amended covenants passed, allowing reasonable commercial vehicles in driveways. 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was having coffee with Gerald Hutchins at a local coffee shop. He'd stayed on the HOA board as treasurer and had become a good friend through the whole ordeal. "You know what's crazy?" he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Patricia actually destroyed her entire life over what? A truck in your driveway. It's insane." "People get drunk on power," I said. "She probably started as someone who just wanted to keep the neighborhood nice. But then it became about control, about making people follow her rules. When I pushed back, it became personal. Well, she certainly learned her lesson. Last I heard, she sold her house and moved to Arizona, starting over somewhere where nobody knows her story." I didn't feel any satisfaction in Patricia's downfall. The whole situation had been exhausting, expensive, and unnecessary. All she'd had to do was apply the rules fairly and with common sense. Instead, she'd chosen vindictiveness and escalation, but the experience taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult. About the importance of documentation and knowing your rights. About the value of good neighbors who are willing to support you when you're being treated unfairly. My business thrived over the following years. I hired 2 additional employees and bought a 3rd loader. We expanded beyond snow removal into general landscaping and property maintenance. The hospital contract remained my anchor client, and that relationship was stronger than ever. Maria and I stayed in Riverside Meadows. It was our home, and we weren't going to let one person's vendetta drive us away. We got involved in the community, hosting block parties and volunteering for neighborhood improvement projects. Sometimes I'd drive past the house where Patricia used to live, now occupied by a nice couple with 2 young kids. They'd ask me to clear their driveway during the winter, and I always made sure they were a priority. It felt good to replace those negative memories with positive ones. The story eventually became somewhat legendary in Rochester's small business community. Other contractors would sometimes ask me about it, wanting to know how I dealt with the harassment. My advice was always the same. Document everything, know your rights, don't back down when you're right, and find good allies. I never heard from Patricia Henderson again after she moved to Arizona. I occasionally wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience, if she'd changed her approach to dealing with neighbors and community rules. I hoped so, for her sake and for anyone unlucky enough to live near her. As for me, I made sure to pay it forward. When I heard about other small business owners dealing with HOA harassment, I'd reach out and offer advice. I'd connect them with Tom Richardson if they needed legal help. I'd show up at HOA meetings to support them if needed. Because at the end of the day, that's what community is supposed to be about. People supporting each other, applying rules fairly, and recognizing that we're all trying to make a living and build good lives for our families. Patricia had forgotten that, if she ever knew it in the first place. But the rest of us in Riverside Meadows learned it through the conflict she created. The loader she'd sabotaged was repaired and ran perfectly for another 5 years, before I eventually replaced it with a newer model. I kept a photo of it on my office wall, though, as a reminder of everything that had happened. A reminder that standing up for yourself matters, even when it's hard. Every winter when the snow starts falling and my phone begins ringing with emergency contracts, I think back to that morning when Patricia first called me about my truck. If I'd just given in, moved my equipment, let her win, my business probably would have slowly died. I would have become just another casualty of an HOA power trip. Instead, I fought back. I stood my ground, and in the end, justice actually prevailed. It doesn't always work out that way, I know. Sometimes the bullies win. Sometimes the system fails. But this time it didn't. That's worth remembering. That's worth fighting for. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, through every snowstorm, every contract, every challenge that comes my way. Because if I can survive Patricia Henderson and come out stronger on the other side, I can survive just about anything.